Over the past couple of months, you have been given numerous opportunities to respond to prompts. These are the questions your teachers have given you when you are expected to give a written answer in the form of an essay. We have tried to give you a variety of questions, but it is important to review some definitions to make sure you are fully prepared to correctly respond to prompts on your PARCC testing next week. Why does this matter? What's your name? My favorite food is pizza. Huh? Clearly, we need to know how to answer questions to avoid confusion. The written portions of the PARCC test are evaluating not only your writing ability, but also your ability to understand and properly respond to the question. You could write a beautiful, well-organized essay, but if it doesn't answer the question being asked, you won't score well. For this activity, you will be reviewing how to understand what a prompt is asking you to do. There are several things you need to remember. When given a prompt on the PARCC, or anywhere really, you need to answer with a well-organized essay that answers the question. These types of questions cannot be answered with one or even a few sentences. You need to remember what we have been working on this year and apply your knowledge about claims, citations, and explanations. Second, you need to make sure your answer fits the question in order to make sense. If the prompt asks you to compare and you analyze instead, you won't get a great score. You can do this by answering this question. What is the definition of the verb, and what is the verb asking you to do? First, let's review some of the verbs you may see on PARCC or in your classes. If a prompt asks you to analyze a piece of writing, you need to look at the choices the author made in the writing rather than simply summarizing the whole story, poem, or article. Analyze means to separate something into parts and discuss, examine, or interpret each part. Compare and contrast. This one should look pretty familiar. Compare means to examine two or more things and to show their similarities. Contrast means to examine two or more things and show their differences. Sometimes you might be asked to do just one of these things. Sometimes you might be asked to do both. Describe. This means that you should write about the physical or non-physical qualities or characteristics of something. Explain. This is when you describe how something works, or you give a definition for something. Identify. This is asking you to indicate what a thing is, what it is composed of, or when and where it occurred. It's very similar to describe. Persuade. This means to try to make someone believe what you believe or to agree with you on a topic by arguing specific points that are supported by evidence and relative details. Evaluate. This means that you need to give a reasoned opinion about something, usually in terms of the quality of a particular piece of writing, idea, or person. If a question asks you to state something, that means you need to explain it clearly and concisely. If a prompt asks you to discuss, it means that you should offer the pros and cons of an issue or even simply explain something interesting about the issue. If you're asked to summarize, that means you give the main points or highlights of a longer piece of writing. Now that we know what the verbs mean, let's review the next part. What is the verb asking you to do? Analyze what? Compare and contrast what? Summarize what? In order to do that, we need to identify the direct and indirect object of the prompt. Let's look at an example. Let's say you're given a question that asks you to persuade the audience that your opinion is correct. Our verb is to persuade. Our direct object is the audience. That's who we need to persuade. But what do we need to persuade them of? That's your indirect object. You need to persuade them that your opinion is correct. So now we're going to be practicing. You will be completing the attached Google document. But first, let's go over an example. Let's say you're given this prompt. You have read the passage from A Boy's Life and Emancipation, a Life Fable. Write an essay that identifies a similar theme in each text and compares and contrasts the approaches each text uses to develop this theme. Be sure to support your response with evidence from both texts. What what you will be doing on the Google document is you will be identifying the verb, what is it asking you to do, and then identifying the direct and indirect objects. Let's look at it. So what I've done here is I've highlighted the verbs, identifies and compares and contrasts. I've highlighted these in green. The next question is, what am I supposed to identify and what am I supposed to compare and contrast? I highlight the answer to that question in yellow. I've highlighted a similar theme in each text because that is what I'm supposed to identify. I have also highlighted in yellow the approaches each text uses to develop this theme because that is what I need to compare and contrast. Now that you've seen an example, please go back to activity number 1 on Google Classroom and open up the Google document. You will be reading through several prompts and you will need to highlight in green the verb and then highlight the direct and indirect objects in yellow. When you are finished with that, please turn it in and move on to activity 2.